why we are significant as Christians is because God has given to us and us alone the weapons by which we can intervene in this spiritual war.
And we do need to intervene in this spiritual war, like David versus Goliath. We're going to be talking about spiritual warfare from the Christian perspective. So that means we're going to be talking about kitty cats and puppy dogs. And so if you're not a Christian by now, then feel free to change the channel, go back to your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. This isn't going to be Sunday School 101. This is going to be for those that have been living the Christian life for quite some time. Yesterday we posted a sermon from Derek Prince, Casting Down Strongholds. We recommend that you watch it a couple of times before actually watching this episode. And be sure to check out the chapters and verses that are referenced and connect the dots about what that sermon is about before you attempt to even consider this broadcast. This broadcast is going to bring you straight into enemy HQ. You're going to be on the radar in ways that you've never even imagined before. Don't attempt this if you're not ready. This is really going to be for those that are already under attack, either through demonic attack or electronic warfare or silent weapons, gang stalking and the like. If you feel like the walls are closing in, then this is the broadcast for you. If you're not there yet, then if you follow the recommendations, you'll be there. That means you have to have resources. You have to have a way to escape out into the countryside. You have to have a way to be an operator in this matrix. If you're married and you got 3 kids, you've got a different vocation right now. This isn't going to be for everyone. Being a soldier means being a soldier in this war. And it is a war. We're born into a war. And being Christians is really part of our destiny. We're citizens of the kingdom, and we're at war. And we're called to participate in this war in every way possible, by preaching, by healing, by casting out devils. We are at war with pure evil, pure wickedness. Not only physical wickedness that rapes and molests children, but spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. Now, the sermon Casting Down Strongholds talks about the dynamics of the battlefield and in a wonderful way that is worth paying attention to. And he talks about having to pray through the defenses of the enemy. Have you ever felt that for yourselves? Not sure how people pray these days, if it's just on Sundays or if it's every day. Do you do it a special way? Do you go in the closet? Do you look out the window? Do you look up to the heavens above? Have you felt the resistance? Have you seen the resistance as you try to pray? Have you felt the interruptions in the matrix as you pray? This is part of the battlefield. This is like it's described in Daniel chapter 10. And again, you're going to want to read that, know that. And of course, they talk about that in Casting Down Strongholds. But we know that we're up against spiritual wickedness. It shows up through different mediums. It body snatches people. It hovers around and looks at you through trees and bushes and clouds, believe it or not. But these things are everywhere. It's like a spiritual pollution. And they're attacking. It's an attack on humanity. It's because of these demonic forces that such erosion has occurred in our society. We've gone from the Brady Bunch to where we are today because of demonic influences. Now you can check out, all of these different faces in the clouds for yourselves. Just search for demon face cloud, and you'll see all sorts of mainstream news reports where people are shocked by the images on the clouds. Perhaps you've seen some of these yourselves, wondered what they were. People have different labels for them. Demons, archons, unclean spirits, and so much more. But of course, this is just part of what's going on. There's an army of darkness behind a veil. It uses camouflage. It comes to this world from another world. And it's in this world that we must go and attack these unclean spirits, these demons, this army of darkness. This is our role to play. But figuring that out is like solving the puzzle, or one of the puzzles, in the Bible. Now, if you check out 2 Corinthians 12, and they talk about this, of course, in casting down strongholds. But Paul makes a reference about someone that he knew 14 years ago. Whether he was in the body or not in the body, he did not know. But he was called up into the third heaven. Now, this is where things get complicated. Because essentially, this is where we must go. To get to where we need to go requires training. So you feel the pushback of the enemy when you pray. And we're told that we're wrestling against spiritual wickedness, persons without bodies, in Ephesians 6:12, that reside in the second heaven, their headquarters. That's where the action is. They come into our world to attack, and we can actually go into their world and attack. You can look at it as spiritual warfare, because that's what it is. In another sense, it's like psychic warfare, telekinetic warfare. And you have unbelievable potential if you know how to use it. But this requires not only the will, but a lifestyle that allows you to fight this evil in a way that can make a huge difference. And essentially every country, every state, every city is ruled by dark forces. And it's these dark forces that you have to attack in order to liberate your town spiritually, so that people will snap out of their spell, if you will. We've been talking about how many people have been assimilated by this system. And while we can contemplate all the different scenarios where people might get assimilated by nanobots or brain chips or parasites or something else, the real wickedness, the real problem is demonic assimilation, demonic possession of these people. But we're dealing with an army. We're dealing with an occupation. They're in your town, they're in your area, they're in your state, they're in your country, wherever you are in the world. And so they must be attacked. Sounds spectacular, doesn't it? But right now, there is some massive spiritual warfare, psychic warfare happening in your town. If you have the feeling that you're being gang stalked, it's not your imagination. And these people that are gang stalking you are attacking you. The demons that are within them are attacking you. We could talk more about that, but for those that have experienced it, then you understand what we're talking about. But there's a way that you can fight back on this battlefield. So not only can you attack in the spiritual sense in a world beyond this world, but you can attack the invaders that come into this world and body snatch other people. And this is the idea of casting out demons. That's really like the frontline action. It's like the trenches, trench warfare when you're going to the store, trench warfare while you're at work, trench warfare while you're talking to people. But you can go beyond the trenches. You've got long distance weapons that are beyond imagination. And this is the reason for the brain fog. This is the reason for the fluoride in the water and for a lot of what's going on. They want people busy or incapacitated so that they can't participate in this spiritual war. So just finding the clarity right now to participate is a struggle, and it's a struggle on purpose. So you have to find ways to achieve mental clarity as much as possible. And for some people it might be no problem given their situation, but for others it's going to be a struggle right now. It's like germ warfare wherever you go. And so that's one of the problems that we're facing now on the battlefield. Having a safe place to stage your psychic, telekinetic attacks, your spiritual attacks against dark forces. Are we allowed to do that? Is that even Christian, you might ask? David versus Goliath. The Old Testament is all about annihilating the enemy. But of course, our foundation is to understand how to be good people. And so that's where the Beatitudes comes in. That's where the 7 virtues comes in. That's where charity comes in. That's where faith comes in. You have to be a good person before you can fight for the good guys. But once you get through the New Testament, you might get curious and look at the Old Testament and you're thinking to yourselves, wow, there's a lot of violence there. And essentially, that's the nature of warfare. We get glimpses of it in the New Testament, talking about how the kingdom of heaven is always being attacked by evil, by violence. It's a war. So a lot of people are going to be in denial about that, but there's no room for hippies in a war, believe it or not. If we were back in the 90s, maybe we could say it's okay to be a hippie, to be a love everyone kind of person, but right now, it's a war. So people are just going to have to accept that and get into that war mode that's inside you. Activate those weapons that are inside you. In any case, we are essentially weapons in this war. Why is that necessary? We're not going to go back into Sunday school. We're not going to talk about why there's even a David versus Goliath happening. But it is. And so it's about time we get into the meat and potatoes of this broadcast. When we think about weapons in a spiritual nature, what reference is there in the New Testament? I mean, this is a real easy question here, but what are you thinking to yourselves? The sword of the Spirit, right? So you find that, of course, in Ephesians chapter 6. And talks about the full armor. Now, of course, many people think that it's essentially like a metaphor, that you should know the Bible by heart and carry faith with you in truth and righteousness. And of course, salvation. Again, you really want to check out the sermon Casting Down Strongholds, because we're not going to dwell on every little feature here. But all of the armor is there to protect you from demonic attack. And it's not meant just to be a metaphor. You're going to need physical armor in this war. And you're going to need a helmet, and you're going to need essentially a bulletproof vest, an EMF-proof vest. You're going to need all the armor you can get in this physical war, as well as this spiritual war. But then they talk about the sword of the Spirit. So we're thinking to ourselves, it's a spiritual war, and there's a sword for that. Now, the Bible tells us that the sword of the Spirit is the Word. And so that's definitely the literal way to look at it. In fact, it's kind of weird when you look at the word sword. It's like word with an S, like a spiritual sword. But what if there is a way to manifest a spiritual sword in this spiritual war? Is that possible? This kind of brings us back to 2 Corinthians 12, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. So they're actually talking about out-of-body experiences in the Bible. You know, a lot of people think about astral projection and remote viewing as occult activities, but it seems like there are many visions and many out-of-body experiences happening in the Bible. So it must be a Christian thing to do. It must be a natural thing to do, like dreaming. So, how do we manifest a spiritual sword in a physical world? Now we have to think about that, don't we? What is the spiritual world? What is the physical world? Let's start with that. That might be easier. The physical world is the visible world. It's the world of your senses, your 5 senses. Your taste, your touch, your sight, your hearing. The smell. In any case, these senses of the physical world help us describe what's going on in the physical world. And of course, it all comes together like consciousness and real time with memory and cognition and all of that. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Don't ask me what the video guy is doing. He's on vacation. It's not about the video guy. It's about what we're talking about here. So what is the physical world? It's the visible world. It's the world of your 5 senses. So what's the opposite of the physical world? It's the spiritual world, right? Okay. So if the physical world is your 5 senses, what you can see, the visible world, then the spiritual world must be the invisible world. Oh, that makes sense. So how do you see the invisible world? Well, you can't use your 5 senses. That wouldn't make any sense, would it? So you have to learn sensory deprivation techniques. That sounds kind of cruel, doesn't it? Sensory deprivation. It's like fasting. So, essentially, in order to see the invisible, you have to be in a sensory deprived environment. How does that happen? Well, if your eyes are open, then you're seeing the visible world. And if your eyes are closed, then you're seeing the visible world, but you might still be able to hear the physical world. So now you need something to deal with that. So perhaps you need a fan or something. Maybe some music, but there's something to be said about music. Music can take you to the wrong place real fast, so it has to be gospel. But a fan would probably be preferable. Now, you might be thinking to yourselves, where are we going with this, Johnson? Sensory deprivation, closing my eyes, turning on the fan. It sounds like I'm going to sleep. It's almost what it is. It's the Twilight Zone. It's what it is. It's the Twilight Zone. But once you go to the Twilight Zone, you're never coming back to the real world. Because the real world, as the normies put it, is just the physical world. So, you have to understand that going in this direction is like going to Wonderland. Things will never be the same for you. As a Christian during this end times cycle during this war, we're called to participate. It would be nice to have more hands on deck. And so this is what the aim of this broadcast is, but it's only fair that you have informed consent. So we don't want to toss you into this and then you come back and say, oh, I'm haunted now. Never should have listened to Johnson. I got demons everywhere. That's why we're saying, unless you're already under attack, this probably isn't going to be for you. But chances are you'll be under attack soon as a Christian in ways that you haven't experienced yet. They call it the evil days. Happens to everyone. And essentially, you'll want to defend yourself. You're given armor and a sword for a reason. You're told that this is a war for a reason. It isn't for you to sit on the sidelines and watch it happen. And we all learn about David versus Goliath for a reason. It's so that we participate and not just assist the dark side by doing nothing. But again, everybody has their own vocation. If you've already got children, young children, we should say, this probably isn't going to be for you. You have enough to deal with. But if you're single right now, which is the best, then this is going to be a vocation for you that you might enjoy. In any case, we just have to say that because life will get very weird for you once you start attempting to participate. So we're going to continue on. So the very first steps here is really to see it for yourself. There's numerous ways that you can see this action for yourself. We're starting with sensory deprivation techniques because essentially, if you want to see the world of the invisible, you have to understand that it's not the world of the physical. Now, we attempt to go there all the time when we say our prayers. Not sure how many people close their eyes when they say their prayers, but essentially, we're going there. So you've been practicing for this your whole life. You've got so much potential, you don't even know it. But you're not doing anything with it because nobody's really talked to you about it. Nobody's connected the dots for you before. You didn't even know this was really an option, a credible option, but it is. So, before we go back to trench warfare and what you can do during the daytime, we're going to talk about looking at the invisible world before you go to sleep. Now, the big trick is to stay in that brainwave pattern where you're in the twilight zone just before you fall asleep. And sleep will be one of your biggest enemies because you'll be there and boom, you'll be dreaming. You come back and you realize that they got you again. They got you to go to sleep. But the idea here is to be in the most relaxed, sensory deprived, perfect sleep environment, no electronics, no television, no Wi-Fi, no unnatural frequencies emitting from your room, etc., etc. You want to be as positive in all ways possible that you can be. And this is another thing that we really need to talk about as a Christian. You know, your hygiene, not only your physical hygiene, but your spiritual hygiene. You know, there is such a thing as spiritual cleanliness, being spiritually clean. And you really have to know what that means in the books of Moses. So, you really need to have, you really need to be doing everything right as much as you can. You know, there's no such thing as Mr. Perfect out there. We're not talking about being Mr. Perfect, but there's a certain responsibility that comes with being a Christian. Of course, it's following the Ten Commandments. It's understanding what the Bible says. It's having faith, leaving doubt behind. You know, having virtue as much as you can. So, you got all that. You've made sure that you've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's. You're ready to go beyond casting out demons from people in the trenches on the front lines. So, we're going to look at the world beyond the veil. Now, essentially, as soon as you close your eyes and try to fall asleep the old-fashioned way, basically in the dark, right? And that's important too. You can't have blinking lights. You can't have, the lava lamp right next to you. You can't have artificial sources of light. Otherwise, that'll really just kind of ruin what's going on. So you have to be in a pretty sensory deprived, natural, preferably, living in the country type of environment. The video guy. So you're going to bed. Turn off the lights. You have no electronics in your room. Now what? Have you ever done that before? Turn on the fan, you get all comfortable, perfect, nothing's bothering you. Now what? Now you start paying attention to the dark corners of the room. And it may take 5 minutes or 10 minutes for your eyes to adjust, for you to train yourself to get into that mode. But essentially, as you get closer and closer to sleep, your brain waves will change. And it's during this transition that things begin to get a little creepy. Most people have had this feeling that they're falling off the bed and they try to catch themselves, but nothing's going on. Is it your imagination? Is there something else happening? That's the twilight zone. That's the frontier that you're going to have to investigate more. You're going to have to focus on it because there's something there. Now, eventually, you're going to want to close your eyes, right? And this is where it becomes dangerous because you know what happens when you're in that type of environment, especially after a long day and you close your eyes. It doesn't take long, does it? And you're dreaming. So now here comes the next step. You basically want to prolong your experience in the twilight zone. And now things will start looking like it's dreamy, but you're not there yet. You'll start seeing images. You'll start seeing shapes. You may even start seeing faces. You'll open your eyes and they might still be there. Thinking to yourself, oh, it's my imagination. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm scared of the dark. There's no courage without fear. So you have to basically spend time in this zone and see what's behind the veil. And you might not get it the first day. You might not get it the second day. But eventually you're going to start seeing things in the dark corners of the room. You're going to start seeing things that when you close your eyes, and you're going to say to yourself, it's your imagination. Maybe you're having a vision. Now, for some reason, most of the action occurs in the center lane. And it's a weird way to put it, but essentially you're going to understand what that means once you start experiencing your full potential. You're going to start seeing a lot of action and feeling a lot of action in the center lane. And where you go from there is really a dangerous situation. Because you may see something that looks friendly, in fact. You know, like, here, have some free donuts. Oh, look, you can have your freedom back if you just take this vaccine. It might be a Jezebel. This army of darkness uses camouflage. And so, essentially, depending on the person, depending on your weakness, depending on your interests, what shows up in front of you at first may or may not seem hostile. You may even think to yourself, oh, let me have a conversation with it. And you might be surprised to receive a response. And then you start saying to yourself, wow, this is so cool. That's the trap. That's how most of these other people lose their way. Now all of a sudden they're in love with the enemy. And that's how this enemy operates. And so you have to remember what you're here for. You have to remember that this enemy hates life. This enemy hates everything that's cute and wonderful. This enemy rapes and molests and tortures children and adults. They are the rapists. They are the murderers. They are the enemy. I've never really had conversations with people to know what they see after trying this. I would assume that most people don't take it seriously enough to actually go there, which is unfortunate. But from most of the videos on this topic, when it comes to astral projection and the like, they seem to have friendly conversations with aliens or whatever creatures may show up. And in our experience, all I can say is that these things are hostile, they're ugly, they're mean, and you're going to see some of the most fantastic things beyond Hollywood. Yeah, you're going to think to yourself, you never knew you had it in you. You never knew that your brain could imagine such things. Can't even begin to describe to you what I've seen. It sounds ridiculous. I wouldn't even want to describe to you what I've seen on the other side beyond just saying faces. But these things attack, and they manifest in our world. You can close your eyes, you see them, you open your eyes, and you can see the faint quantum distortion of them still kind of here in this world, attacking you. It's far out. It would be nice to have a community of like-minded people, believe it or not, so that we could actually exchange ideas and experiences. But essentially, we're getting off topic here. Now comes the idea of attacking the enemy in the trenches. Spiritual warfare is about projecting energy, essentially, from your person at a target. And that too seems a little difficult to describe with a straight face, but it is the way it is. The dark side is doing it to Christians all the time. We've talked about this in some of the broadcasts, some of the gratuitous windmilling, the finger pointing, the scratching, the scraping. Essentially, it's kind of like the interpreter for the hearing impaired on television. All of these hand signs, hand gestures. It's unbearable to watch. Gives you a weird feeling. It's witchcraft. They're using spiritual weapons of the dark side against you. It's all about control, domination, and manipulation in the kingdom of darkness. Of course, it's only the kingdom of heaven that offers you free choice and freedom. But you're being attacked all the time, whether you know it or not. And these attacks can be rather trivial in nature, like making you mess up, spill, trip, bump into things, hurt yourself, and beyond. It's referred to as action at a distance. But there are many other weapons that are being deployed and used against you. Psychic weapons, fortune telling. You're dealing with an enemy that can see the future, that plots against you in ways that most people can't imagine. So given that it's a war, that you're under attack, they're stalking you and trying to do everything they can to hurt you in a very serious way. Poison you, irradiate you, infect you, spray you, etc., etc. It's only fair that you protect yourselves. And this is going way beyond living in the Holy Land and loving your neighbor kind of thing. We're dealing with dogs and the like. So it's a very different perspective. Again, we're not going to have this discussion. How many times do you forgive your brother? 7 times, 7 times 70. How many times do you have to turn your cheek? When is enough? Are you going to love the rapist as they're raping you? Again, we're not going to spend time on Sunday School 101, but I feel like you have to mention that because it's essentially one of the first things that pops into your mind. Oh, it's okay. We'll just turn the other cheek and let them send us to the extermination camps. Again, that's a decision that is up to you and that I certainly don't blame people for. I understand where they're coming from. But, that's Matthew chapter 5, or early on in the earthly ministry. By the end of it, it's, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. What is the opposite of peace but war? And it involves the turning over tables and so much more. So obviously it isn't just about loving your neighbor. And there's a lot to be said. We're not going to have the discussion. Do you love the enemy? Do you love people that hate you, that despise you, that use you, that curse you? You want to. You really do. And so you can hate the sin and love the sinner. There's nothing wrong with that. What we're talking about here is spiritual warfare. And our enemies are demons and devils and the like. So we're not necessarily targeting people, but certainly there must be targets that are people, like Bill Gates and some of these other people on television. What can you do to these people at a distance? Quite a bit. And so, the question is, should you? That's up to you. We're going to talk about what you can do, not whether you should do it. And we'll probably come back to that discussion once the war is over. Should we have annihilated the enemy? Wouldn't it have been better to go to the extermination camp? I don't know. At least our children are safe, though. So we'll have that debate some other time. Now here we come back to Ephesians 6:13, the armor and the sword. So the armor is all defensive. It's talking about, obviously, being a good person, right? Righteous, honest, following the Ten Commandments. It's symbolic in that way, but it's also meant for you to manifest physical armor in the real world. Not only for physical battle, but also for spiritual battle. And we've talked about this in other broadcasts, but the sword of the Spirit essentially is the projection of a spiritual attack in the spiritual world, or a spiritual attack on the physical world, a sword of the Spirit. Now, obviously, that is a very complicated term, right? And so, you want to make sure that you're targeting the right thing here. You don't want to be smacking people with the sword of the Spirit, with your sword, without due cause. But essentially it is possible to project a spiritual attack in the spiritual world or the physical world. And when you get experienced at it, you'll start seeing a distortion in the physical world. And again, that might sound rather ridiculous, but when you get there, you'll get there. Now, how do you project a spiritual attack on the physical world? You're going to want to start small here. And so we don't want to give people too much information too fast, because it's important to baby step to where you're going, kind of like a math class. You don't start with calculus. But essentially, your index finger on your right hand is the best place to start. Think of it as an antenna. You practice probably a lot with your mouse clicking. But essentially, little twitches of your finger, projected the right way, can slice and dice through enemies near and far, whether in your neighborhood, on the television, or in the twilight zone. So your index finger is really the first step. And we talked a little bit about this in a broadcast titled Karen Goes Crazy in Target, where we kind of show you a physics class where electrons will more readily shoot out of the index finger than, a closed hand or something like that. And that's essentially the idea in a nutshell. But you're basically going to be using your finger as your first sword. And so you'll want to point and click or pierce in your mind through the person. Now, at first it may not feel like anything's happening, but the more you practice, the better you'll get. Essentially, your imagination is the limit to where this can go. And you might be thinking to yourself, this can go to some pretty creepy places. You can imagine yourself laying in bed with your eyes closed, waving your finger around, and you're all by yourself. That's why you really got to be by yourself, because if anybody sees you doing this, you're headed to the madhouse. But there's a reason why they want to put people like that under medication. They have a funny way of calling truth lies and lies truth these days. And so what seems weird to some people is perfectly normal to other people. It's kind of like watching people dance. Imagine them doing what they're doing without the music. You saw people moving like that in the middle of the afternoon. You might be thinking to yourself, that's crazy. But you turn off the lights, you play some music, it's totally normal. You know what I mean? So movements and gestures, are subject to interpretation. In any case, don't let it hold you back. But inevitably, you'll be thinking to yourself, oh, this is crazy. I can't be doing this. What can I tell you? It's just the way it is. So, practice makes perfect. Focus on the dark corners. Focus on the twilight zone. Focus on using your finger as an antenna. And imagine, you're just pushing into people's brains or something. Sounds mean, but it's a war. I mean, you see somebody witchy, you see a troll, they got the rainbow flag. Let them have it. Just bam, Practice. Plenty of targets out there. But as soon as you start, entering the battlefield, watch out. The matrix is just going to change around you in ways you can't even imagine. But we'll try and help you with tips and pointers, if you will. What else can we say at this stage? Clarity of mind is important. Being sober is important, especially during the winter months, the thinning of the veil. But undoubtedly there are performing enhancing substances out there that will take it to another level. And of course, this is all subject to interpretation as far as visuals are concerned. But once you get past is this really happening, you'll understand the necessity for performance enhancing natural substances. We're not talking about hardcore illicit drugs. We're not talking about flakka or anything like that, but there are certain things that will make your experience a little more powerful. Has to do with limiting factors and opening up the third eye. And so, there's things like turmeric that really help. Having a tablespoon of turmeric. Perhaps some ginkgo to open up the circulation in the brain. You want to have plenty of tryptophan, tomatoes, and the like. You run out of tryptophan, then it's kind of like running out of gas in a way. And people will obviously experiment with alcohol. Not sure if it really helps or doesn't help. Maybe in the sensory deprivation arena. NaC once a week or a couple times a week may be beneficial. That's an amino acid that clears up the brain pretty good. Gets you to focus kind of like a wonder medication. But you can find that at the natural supplement store. The local medical cannabis facility will probably help you out as well. But that really kind of opens up the third eye, some of you will understand. It's not a very Christian thing to say, munch on this herb, take this vitamin, but, eat this plant, eat a tomato. But essentially these things help a lot. But you have to know your limits, and you have to... It's better to microdose than it is to take, the full dose. You can always take more, you can't ever take less. So, with those kind of things, you're going to want to test it out and find your comfort zone. Now, this might seem, a little weird, but essentially, getting you there is very important. At least some of you there. And you'll understand why once you become a little more experienced. But you can have an impact in your area. You can have an impact in your town in ways that you've never had before. And your town needs it. Your state needs it. Your country needs it. So spend a little time here, practicing in the twilight zone, looking for faces in the dark corners. It's not your imagination. It's not a hallucination. It's not anything like that. But you'll start seeing the patterns for yourselves, the familiar faces, and the feelings that come with it. The idea, of course, for those that are there or going to get there, the idea is to destroy the enemy, to disrupt the enemy, to attack it at its core. You have to know that these things will get in your face and they'll be a nuisance. You can always turn on the lights and kind of snap out of it and, say a prayer or two, and hopefully they'll go away. But essentially, you're going to have to confront these things. They'll get in your face. They'll come at you, in all different sorts of ways. You have to push them, poke them, slice them, dice them, disintegrate them. Applying thoughts and ideas are very powerful. Your spoken word is very powerful as well. Remember the parable of the fig tree, at least the story of the fig tree that withers. And so you have that capability. Tell the enemy to, well, leave it to your imagination. Tell the enemy to be destroyed, to disintegrate, to explode, to rupture. But attack it at its core, because essentially a lot of these things revolve around the idea of an eye or an atom or a cell. So you're going to want to attack it at its core, rupture its core, destroy its core, separate its core. You'll have to see it to understand. But if you get there, let us know. If you found this interesting, let us know. If you found this a little bizarre, check out 2 Corinthians 12. Check out Casting Down Strongholds. Check out Ephesians 6:13. 6:12, we should say. And understand that we're here to participate in this war. And there's something you can do out there. More than you can imagine. You're more powerful than you can imagine. Of course, you have to take that with humility. We're players on the chessboard. Don't get any delusions of grandeur out there. But essentially, we're all here to cast stones at the devil. Kind of like the way David did. We'll leave it there for this broadcast. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Until the next time. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.